What you're about to hear will leave you speechless. This is the kind of story that makes you question everything about justice, dignity, and what happens when kindness meets cruelty. If you think you've heard the most shocking tale of revenge, wait until you hear what happened to Aminata. On a freezing Chicago morning, Aminata stood at the bus stop, her worn jacket barely protecting her from the bitter wind. She clutched a plastic bag containing Mrs. Henderson's medications, her breath forming small clouds in the icy air. 5 years had passed since she'd arrived from Senegal, but she still couldn't get used to these harsh winters. When she reached the luxury neighborhood of Lincoln Park, she paused briefly in front of Mrs. Henderson's massive three-story mansion. Every room blazed with light, but Aminata knew she wouldn't feel any of that warmth inside. What awaited her were only insults and humiliation. She entered quietly through the back door. Mrs. Henderson sat in her bedroom armchair, watching television. The 78-year-old woman's face twisted with disgust when she saw Aminata. "Oh, it's you again," she said with revulsion. "You're late. Can't you even do such a simple job properly?" Aminata replied calmly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson. The bus was delayed. I brought your medications." The old woman snatched the bag from Aminata's hands and peered inside. "Is this all? I told you to get 3 medications. The doctor said you only needed these 2 refilled, Mrs. Henderson. He said the other one wasn't necessary." "Shut up," the old woman screamed. "Your people always make excuses. Is this what they taught you in Africa? How to be lazy?" Aminata's heart clenched, but she remained silent. She pulled out her stethoscope and began checking Mrs. Henderson's pulse. She had worked as a nurse in Senegal, but her diploma wasn't recognized here. "Get your hands off me," Mrs. Henderson snapped. "Don't touch me with your dirty hands. Who knows what diseases you're carrying?" Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable tales of justice and revenge. That day seemed destined to pass, like all the others, filled with Mrs. Henderson's poisonous words, until the phone rang. Mrs. Henderson answered with her usual harsh tone, but Aminata noticed her voice gradually changing. The conversation seemed serious, and when she hung up, the old woman's face had gone pale. "That was my lawyer," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, staring at the wall. My son Michael is contesting my will." Aminata continued organizing the medications, pretending not to listen, but her ears were alert. Mrs. Henderson had 3 children, but none of them visited her. Only Aminata was there, day after day, enduring the abuse. 30 years I raised that ungrateful boy," Mrs. Henderson muttered. "Sent him to the best schools, gave him everything. And now he thinks he can steal my money before I'm even dead." For the first time in 5 years, Aminata saw something other than hatred in the old woman's eyes. She saw fear. Fear of dying alone. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that her own children saw her as nothing more than a bank account. But Mrs. Henderson quickly masked her vulnerability with more cruelty. "What are you staring at? Get back to work, and make sure you clean the bathroom properly this time. Last week, it still smelled like Africa." Aminata bit her tongue and continued her duties. She had learned that responding only made things worse. But deep inside, something was building, a quiet strength she didn't even know she possessed. But the most shocking part was yet to come. The months that followed brought subtle changes. Mrs. Henderson's health deteriorated, and her family's visits became even rarer. Her daughter Rebecca came once a month, but only to complain about expenses. Her younger son David lived in California and hadn't visited in 2 years. Only Michael, the eldest, appeared occasionally, always with papers for his mother to sign. During one of these visits, Aminata was cleaning the hallway when she overheard a heated argument between Michael and his mother. You're being ridiculous, mother, Michael said coldly. That African woman is probably stealing from you. How do you know she's not taking your jewelry, your cash? Aminata has never taken anything, Mrs. Henderson replied weakly. Of course she hasn't been caught yet. Michael laughed bitterly. But mark my words, when you're gone, she'll disappear with whatever she can carry. These people are all the same. Aminata's hands trembled as she held the cleaning cloth. She wanted to storm into the room and defend herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she quietly continued her work, her heart burning with indignation. It was at this exact moment that everything changed. That evening, after Michael left, Mrs. Henderson called Aminata to her room. The old woman looked exhausted, her usual fire dimmed by the confrontation with her son. Aminata, she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Sit down. Aminata hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chair near the bed. In 5 years, Mrs. Henderson had never asked her to sit. My children think I'm a fool, Mrs. Henderson began. They think I don't see what they're doing, circling like vultures, waiting for me to die so they can fight over my money. Aminata remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. You know what's funny? Mrs. Henderson continued. The only person who's been here every day, through my worst moments, through my sickness and my anger, is someone I've treated terribly. For a moment, Aminata thought she saw remorse in the old woman's eyes. But then Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened again. Don't think this changes anything, she snapped. You're still just the help, but you're reliable help. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. 3 weeks later, on a particularly cold Tuesday morning, Aminata arrived to find Mrs. Henderson unresponsive in her bed. She immediately called 911, performing CPR until the paramedics arrived. But it was too late. Mrs. Henderson had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small and cold, much like the woman herself. Michael, Rebecca, and David stood together, whispering about the will and their inheritance. They barely acknowledged Aminata's presence, even though she had been the one to find their mother. A week after the funeral, Aminata received a call from Mrs. Henderson's lawyer, Mr. Patterson. Miss Aminata, he said formally, I need you to come to my office. There are some matters in Mrs. Henderson's will that concern you. Aminata's heart sank. She assumed Mrs. Henderson's children had accused her of theft, just as Michael had predicted. She prepared herself for legal trouble, gathering what little money she had for a lawyer. But when she arrived at the downtown law office, she found Mrs. Henderson's 3 children already seated, their faces red with anger. This is outrageous, Michael was shouting at the lawyer. There must be some mistake. Rebecca was crying, not from grief, but from rage. How dare she? How dare she do this to us? David sat in stunned silence, staring at the papers in his hands. Mr. Patterson gestured for Aminata to sit. Miss Aminata, I'm sure you're wondering why you're here. She nodded nervously, glancing at the furious family members. Mrs. Henderson changed her will 6 months ago, the lawyer explained. She has left you her house and 50% of her estate. You won't believe what happened next. The room erupted in chaos. Michael jumped to his feet, screaming about challenging the will. Rebecca accused Aminata of manipulating their mother. David demanded to know how much money was involved. But Mr. Patterson held up his hand for silence. There's more. Mrs. Henderson also left a letter specifically for Miss Aminata. With shaking hands, Aminata took the sealed envelope. Inside, in Mrs. Henderson's careful handwriting, was a confession that would change everything. Aminata, if you're reading this, I am gone, and my children are probably furious. Good. For 30 years, I watched them become greedy, selfish people who who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. They never loved me. They loved what I could give them. You, on the other hand, showed up every day, even when I was cruel to you, even when I said terrible things about your country, your people, your skin color. You took care of me when my own children couldn't be bothered. But there's something you don't know. Something I should have told you years ago. In 1987, I was driving through downtown Chicago when I hit a young African man with my car. He was crossing legally, but I was drunk. Instead of stopping to help, I drove away. That man died, leaving behind a wife and baby daughter in Senegal. That man was your father. I found out who he was later through news reports. I learned about the family he left behind. For 35 years, I've carried this guilt. When you showed up at my door 5 years ago, I recognized your last name immediately. I knew who you were. I could have told you the truth, could have helped you immediately. Instead, I chose to torture myself, and you, by keeping you close while treating you terribly. It was my way of punishing myself for what I had done. The money I'm leaving you is not charity. It's the least I can do to try to make amends for destroying your family. Your father would have been so proud of the woman you've become. I'm sorry, Aminata. I'm so very sorry. Margaret Henderson. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what's coming. Aminata's hands trembled as she finished reading the letter. The room had gone completely silent. Mrs. Henderson's children stared at her, their anger replaced by shock and confusion. What does it say? Rebecca whispered. Aminata looked up, tears streaming down her face. For 5 years, she had wondered why her father never came to America as he had promised. Her mother had died waiting for him, never knowing what had happened. Now, finally, she had answers. But she also had a choice. She could reveal the truth and destroy Mrs. Henderson's children's memory of their mother, or she could keep the secret and let them believe what they wanted to believe. It says, Aminata began slowly, that your mother was grateful for my care, and she wanted to make sure I was provided for. Michael scoffed. That's ridiculous. There has to be more to it. She also wrote, Aminata continued, folding the letter carefully, that she hopes her children will learn to be better people than she was. The lawyer cleared his throat. The will is legally binding. Mrs. Henderson was of sound mind when she made these changes. However, if you wish to contest it, no, Aminata said firmly. I don't want to contest anything, but I also don't want to fight her children. She turned to face Michael, Rebecca, and David. Your mother left me the house and half the money. I propose we sell the house and split everything 4 ways, 1 part for each of you and 1 part for me. The siblings exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her offer. Why would you do that? David asked suspiciously. Aminata smiled sadly. Because your mother taught me something important. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It only creates more of them. Wait a minute. Don't miss this detail. 6 months later, Aminata stood in the lobby of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, wearing her new nurse's uniform. With her share of Mrs. Henderson's estate, she had been able to get her Senegalese nursing credentials recognized and complete additional training. As she walked through the halls, she thought about Mrs. Henderson's letter, which she kept in a safe deposit box. The secret would die with her. Some truths were too painful to share. But she had made a promise to herself and to her father's memory. She would use her new position to help people, regardless of their color, their background, or how they treated her. In her pocket, she carried a small photo of her father that her mother had given her before she died. Papa, she whispered, I understand now why you never came home, but I'm here now, and I'm going to make you proud. That afternoon, her first patient was an elderly white man who had been abandoned by his family. As she checked his vital signs, He looked at her with suspicious eyes. "Where are you from?" he asked rudely. "Senegal," Aminata replied with a gentle smile. "But today, I'm here to take care of you." The man studied her face, perhaps seeing something in her expression that reminded him of his own mortality, his own need for compassion. "Thank you," he said quietly. Aminata nodded and continued her work, knowing that somewhere, somehow, Mrs. Henderson was finally at peace. It was too late now, but something incredible was about to happen. The story of Aminata and Mrs. Henderson spread throughout the Chicago medical community. Colleagues were amazed by Aminata's generosity toward the Henderson children, who had initially treated her with suspicion and hostility. Michael Henderson, in particular, was changed by the experience. He began volunteering at immigrant assistance programs, quietly trying to atone for his own prejudices. He never knew the full truth about his mother's past, but Aminata's grace in the face of years of abuse had shown him a different way to be human. Rebecca used her portion of the inheritance to establish a scholarship fund for African immigrants pursuing medical degrees. She named it the Margaret Henderson Memorial Fund, believing she was honoring her mother's final act of generosity. David moved back to Chicago and became a regular volunteer at the hospital where Aminata worked. He often asked her about her homeland, genuinely curious about the culture his mother had taught him to despise. None of them ever learned that their mother was responsible for the death of Aminata's father. That secret remained buried with Margaret Henderson, known only to Aminata and the lawyer who had sealed the confession in his files. This was her last chance. Years later, as Aminata became head nurse of her department, she would sometimes think about the strange journey that had brought her to America. Her father's death had been tragic, senseless, and caused by hatred and fear. But his daughter's response to that tragedy had been the opposite: forgiveness, compassion, and hope. She never forgot Mrs. Henderson's cruelty, but she also never forgot the broken, frightened woman underneath all that anger. In her final months, the old woman had found a way to acknowledge her wrongs and make amends, even if she couldn't bring herself to confess the full truth while she was alive. Sometimes, late at night, when Aminata walked through the quiet hospital corridors, she would remember her father's voice singing lullabies in Wolof. She would think about the family she had lost and the new family she had found among her colleagues and patients. The cycle of hatred had ended with her. Her father's death had not been in vain if it ultimately led to healing rather than more pain. And in that healing, both Aminata and Mrs. Henderson had found a kind of redemption, one through forgiveness, the other through a final act of justice that came 35 years too late, but still came. When they thought it was all over, the real surprise was just beginning. On the 5th anniversary of Mrs. Henderson's death, Aminata received an unexpected visitor at the hospital. It was Mrs. Henderson's great-granddaughter, Michael's daughter Sarah, now a first-year medical student. "Nurse Aminata," Sarah said nervously, "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "My father told me what you did with the inheritance, how you could have kept everything but chose to share it with our family instead. He said it changed his whole perspective on life." Aminata smiled. "Your great-grandmother was a complicated woman, but in the end, she wanted to do the right thing." Sarah nodded. "I'm studying to be a doctor because of you. My father said, if someone could show that much grace after being treated so poorly, then maybe there's hope for all of us to be better." As the young woman walked away, Aminata felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with revenge or justice. It was the feeling of a cycle being broken, of love conquering hate, of hope being passed from one generation to the next. Her father would have been proud. Mrs. Henderson, in her own tortured way, had finally found peace. And Aminata had learned that sometimes the greatest revenge is not revenge at all, but the choice to heal instead of harm, to love instead of hate, to build instead of destroy. The voice on the phone was familiar, but what came next shocked everyone. The truth was that Mrs. Henderson's confession had given Aminata more than money or property. It had given her closure, understanding, and the power to choose how her story would end. She chose grace over grievance, forgiveness over fury, and in doing so, she honored both her father's memory and her own values. The immigrants who came after her would benefit from the programs Rebecca had funded. The patients she cared for would receive compassion instead of prejudice. The young doctors she mentored would learn that healing begins with seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of where they come from or what they look like. This was Aminata's true inheritance, not the money or the house, but the opportunity to transform pain into purpose, trauma into triumph, and hatred into healing. And somewhere in the quiet corners of Chicago, in hospital rooms and scholarship applications, in volunteer programs and family dinner conversations, the ripple effects of her choice continued to spread, touching lives that would never know the full story, but would benefit from its legacy nonetheless. Real wealth isn't measured in money, but in the lives we touch and the hatred we choose not to pass on. Sometimes the greatest victory is not getting even, but getting better and helping others do the same.